Since the dawn of creation, one name has echoed across the ages: Michael, the defender of heaven. When angels fell to pride, he stood unshaken. When Satan claimed dominion, he defied him. When nations trembled, he became their shield. From Daniel's visions to the Revelation war, he has led the hosts of heaven into battle. But Michael's power is not pride. It is obedience, not glory, but sacrifice. He weighs souls with justice, heals the broken, and guards the faithful. From the deserts of Moses to the battlefields of today, his sword still burns against the darkness. This is more than legend. It is a war that never ended. Archangel Michael, defender of heaven. Did you know that one archangel has been fighting Satan since the very beginning? From the first whispers of his name in ancient Jewish texts to his dramatic showdown in the book of Revelation, Michael has stood as heaven's unshakable defender. His story spans millennia, woven into the fabric of scripture and sacred tradition. In this video, we'll trace Michael's journey from guardian prince of Israel to commander of God's heavenly armies. You'll discover how his loyalty and strength made him the ultimate spiritual warrior, and what his battles mean for us today. Before we dive in, drop a comment with your name, your city, and what time of day you're tuning in. I want to see who's gathered here with us. The name Michael carries a meaning that shaped eternity before the archangel ever drew his sword. In Hebrew, Michael, translates directly as, "who is like God," a phrase etched into his identity since the earliest Jewish texts. But this wasn't just a title. It was a declaration that echoed through heaven's courts every time he spoke. Consider the weight of bearing such a name among celestial beings. Angels existed to serve, not to compare themselves to their creator. So why would one carry a question that borders on blasphemy? 3rd century BCE Jewish scribes encoded this paradox into their writings. The book of Daniel, one of Michael's earliest appearances, introduces him as one of the chief princes without explaining his name. Yet that rhetorical question, who is like God, would reverberate differently across traditions. Rabbinic commentators saw it as a shield against idolatry, a perpetual reminder of divine uniqueness. Christian theologians interpreted it as Michael's battle cry against Satan's pride. Even Islamic texts preserved Michael as one of 4 archangels, though they muted the name's challenging tone. The tension lies in how Michael embodies the answer to his own name. He doesn't claim equality with the divine. His power comes from unequivocal submission. Early apocalyptic literature reveals this distinction. When lesser angels faltered during the Watchers' rebellion, Michael acted without hesitation. But he never positioned himself as God's rival. Instead, his deeds demonstrated the vast chasm between creator and creation. Jewish mystics recorded debates about whether Michael's name reflected his nature or his mission. The Zohar suggests both. His entire existence became a counterpoint to heavenly rebellion. By the time Revelation depicts Michael casting Satan from heaven, the full significance of his name emerges. Before striking the blow, he doesn't boast. He serves. This pattern appeared centuries earlier in Jude's epistle, where Michael disputes with the devil over Moses' body. Even then, he deferred judgment with the phrase, "The Lord rebuke you." Early church fathers like Origen seized on this detail. They argued that Michael's humility proved his fitness for leadership. His restraint became as legendary as his strength. Monastic scribes in the Middle Ages illuminated manuscripts showing Michael with scales, not to measure himself against God, but to weigh souls impartially. This imagery reveals the name's final dimension. Michael judges as God judges, loves as God loves, but remains unmistakably subordinate. Islamic traditions soften the comparison further, presenting Michael as a nurturing figure who oversees rain and vegetation. Yet even here, the archangel mediates divine will rather than embodying it. The name's power persists in modern spiritual warfare prayers. When believers invoke Saint Michael, they aren't summoning a rival deity, they're calling on heaven's most faithful reflection of divine justice. This careful balance between representation and reverence took shape in those first 3 syllables, Michael. a question forged into identity, a challenge turned to service, and the outline of a destiny that would unfold across battles no other angel could wage. Michael first appears in Jewish texts during a turbulent era, the Second Temple period, when Israel struggled under foreign rule. Fragments from this time reveal something surprising. He wasn't gradually elevated to leadership. From his earliest mentions, writers treated him as heaven's preeminent warrior. The Book of Daniel, composed around 165 BCE, calls him one of the chief princes who defends Israel against supernatural opponents. But why would a relatively new text present him this way? Some scholars suggest that Michael absorbed traits from older Canaanite or Babylonian protector deities, transformed to serve monotheistic beliefs. Others argue his role developed organically from Jewish angelology's growing complexity during exile. Either way, his authority seems unquestioned from the start. Compare this to the richer angelic hierarchy described in the Book of Enoch, likely written around the same time. Enoch's authors name Michael alongside Raphael and Gabriel as archangels overseeing specific domains. Yet even here, Michael stands apart. He binds the rebellious watchers, intercedes for humanity, and guards Eden's secrets. These texts don't establish his rank through formal hierarchies. Instead, his actions define his status. The Dead Sea Scrolls reinforce this view, portraying Michael leading heavenly forces against Belial's darkness. What's striking is how consistently these sources, despite differing traditions, align on one point. Michael acts as God's supreme agent in cosmic conflict. Archaeology fills in missing details. Inscriptions at Jewish synagogues from the early centuries CE frequently invoke Michael's protection, suggesting popular devotion existed alongside theological writings. But puzzles remain. A few scholars point to possible parallels between Michael and the Persian Amesha-Spenter, divine beings tasked with protecting creation. Could cross-cultural exchange have shaped his portrayal? The evidence remains inconclusive. What's clear is that by the 1st century, writers like the philosopher Philo treated Michael's leadership as a fact without needing explanation. The most revealing early text might be the Testament of Abraham, where Michael accompanies souls after death. Here, the archangel weeps at human sin, a startling vulnerability for a celestial warrior. This duality hints at why early communities embraced him. He combined invincibility in battle with profound empathy. Jewish apocalypses written around Rome's occupation of Judea expanded his duties further. He now guarded not just Israel, but the righteous of all nations. By the time Christianity emerged, Michael's core identity was already fixed: heaven's commander, humanity's advocate, and the living answer to the question embedded in his name. Yet these early sources leave intentional gaps. They never depict his origin story or full powers. That ambiguity allowed later traditions to expand his role while preserving his mystery. The stage was set for his most dramatic confrontation yet, one that would redefine spiritual warfare forever. One of Michael's most revealing moments comes from a single cryptic verse in the New Testament. Jude 9 describes a confrontation between the archangel and Satan over the body of Moses. But there's no record of this battle in the Old Testament. Early Christians inherited this story from lost apocryphal texts like the Assumption of Moses, where the details were fleshed out. According to those traditions, Satan claimed Moses' body by arguing the prophet had murdered in Egypt. What happens next defies expectations. Michael, heaven's supreme warlord, refuses to directly rebuke the devil. Instead, he says, "The Lord rebuke you," leaving judgment to God. This restraint seems baffling at first. Michael had already defeated celestial rebels from heaven in Revelation. Why show hesitation here? The early church saw profound theology in this moment. By deferring to divine authority, Michael demonstrated perfect submission, the opposite of Satan's pride. Church fathers like Origen argued that if even an archangel wouldn't arrogate judgment to himself, humans certainly shouldn't. This became a model for spiritual warfare. True strength lay in obedience, not brute force. The lost books of the Bible preserve fuller versions of this encounter. Some manuscripts describe Satan fleeing at Michael's words, not because of the archangel's power, but because invoking God's authority stripped the devil of any legal claim. This legalistic framework mattered to ancient readers. They understood cosmic conflict as battles over divine law, not just physical fights. Michael's refusal to utter his own rebuke showed he respected those spiritual statutes. Later Byzantine art captured this nuance by depicting the Moses incident differently than Revelation's war. Here, Michael stands calm, his sword sheathed, while mere words carry divine power. Contrast this with medieval portrayals of Michael as a dragon-slaying knight. Those images emphasized his military prowess, but the Moses story reveals something deeper about his character. Jewish mystics in the Kabbalistic tradition took it further, suggesting Satan's accusation against Moses contained a grain of truth, and that Michael's humility created space for mercy. This aligns with how the archangel appears in Islamic narratives, where Michael often intercedes for humans rather than condemning them. The theological implications rippled through history. Protestant reformers cited Jude 9 to argue against the veneration of saints, since even Michael didn't accept undue honor. Catholic exorcism manuals adopted his phrase verbatim as the proper way to confront demons without falling into pride. Modern scholars note how this brief episode encapsulates Michael's entire role. He wields absolute might, but only under absolute submission. That paradox defines his victories in every tradition. We're left with a striking reality. Heaven's greatest warrior won his most emblematic battle not by striking harder, but by kneeling before divine authority. This moment established a pattern for conflicts to come. Whether facing the dragon in Revelation or weighing souls at judgment, Michael's power would always flow from restraint. His next challenge would test that principle on the largest scale yet. The Book of Daniel contains the Hebrew Bible's most explicit vision of Michael as an end-time protector. In chapters 10 through 12, a celestial messenger reveals an unsettling truth to Daniel. Earthly wars reflect battles between unseen princes. Persia's guardian angel resists God's messenger for 21 days, until Michael arrives as Israel's divine champion. This scene introduces a crucial shift in Michael's role. He's no longer just a warrior. He becomes heaven's appointed governor over nations. The text specifically calls him your prince, directly linking him to Jewish survival during apocalyptic trials. What distinguishes this vision from earlier angelic encounters is its geopolitical scope. Persian Zoroastrianism taught of twin spirits locked in cosmic struggle, but Daniel's prophecy reworks that idea. Here, Michael doesn't battle evil spirits alone. He oversees a system where nations have heavenly representatives. Yet Israel's fate rests uniquely in his hands. Chapter 12, verse 1 declares he'll arise during unprecedented distress, ensuring the faithful's deliverance. Scholars note this passage borrows military terminology. The Hebrew word, translated as stand up, implies a commander taking a strategic position before battle. The implications ripple through time. This prophecy shaped Jewish expectations during the Maccabean revolt, when Antiochus IV Christians reinterpreted Daniel's timeline to anticipate Christ's return. Revelation's war in heaven directly echoes Daniel's language. Both depict Michael leading forces against supernatural adversaries. But Daniel's version carries subtle differences. While Revelation shows Michael defeating Satan outright, Daniel presents him sustaining Israel through a prolonged crisis. This nuance influenced medieval Jewish mystics who saw Michael intervening at history's darkest hours rather than ending conflict permanently. Cultural context clarifies the stakes. Ancient Near Eastern texts often depicted gods fighting for their favored nations. Daniel subverts that by showing Michael defending a people without a kingdom, Jews under foreign rule. The prophecy insists heavenly intervention isn't about national dominance but covenantal faithfulness. Early commentators noticed that Michael appears alone in Daniel, unlike Enoch's descriptions of multiple archangels. This solitary role reinforced his identification as Israel's exclusive protector in later traditions. Modern readers often miss how revolutionary this vision was. Persian, Greek, and Roman religions tied deities to imperial power. Michael upends that hierarchy. He answers to no earthly throne. The Dead Sea Scrolls reveal how deeply this resonated. Sectarian writings describe the Prince of Light battling Belial's forces, applying Daniel's framework to their own struggles. Early Christian apocalyptic texts, like the Shepherd of Hermas, would later adopt similar imagery for the church's trials. The most startling detail emerges in Daniel 12's resurrection promise. Michael's intervention precedes the dead rising, an idea virtually absent from earlier Hebrew scripture. This connects his role to eternal outcomes, not just temporal deliverance. The text implies Michael doesn't merely fight for Israel's survival, he guards their ultimate destiny. Later Jewish and Christian traditions would expand this, attributing to him the resurrection trumpet's blast and the sorting of souls. Daniel's vision left an indelible mark. It transformed Michael from a warrior angel into an eschatological guardian whose duties spanned nations and centuries. His next confrontation, however, would eclipse even this monumental task, not on earth, but in heaven itself. The war in heaven described in Revelation 12 marks the climax of Michael's story, the moment he ceases being a guardian and becomes heaven's supreme commander. The passage depicts a dragon attacking a heavenly woman, only for Michael and his angels to engage in cosmic combat. But why doesn't God intervene directly, as in the Old Testament theophanies? Revelation's vision reflects a theological shift. Divine justice now operates through appointed representatives. Michael's victory isn't just about strength, it validates the entire heavenly hierarchy. Ancient audiences would have recognized the dragon's symbolism, drawing from Near Eastern chaos myths like Babylon's Tiamat or Canaanite Lotan. The beast represents primordial disorder. Earlier scriptures showed Yahweh battling Leviathan personally, but Revelation delegates this to Michael. Early Christian commentators like Tertullian saw this as intentional. The archangel's triumph proved created beings could wield divine authority without rebellion. The text's phrasing reinforces this. Michael prevails by the blood of the Lamb, emphasizing delegated power rather than inherent might. The battle's aftermath reshapes cosmology. Unlike Daniel's ongoing struggles, Revelation's war ends with Satan's permanent expulsion. This doesn't mean evil vanishes, the dragon merely shifts his battleground to earth, but heaven's chain of command is solidified. Medieval theologians debated whether this conflict occurred before creation or during Christ's ascension. Eastern Orthodox tradition favors the former, seeing Michael's rebellion response like Aquinas argued that it coincided with Christ's victory over death. Either interpretation underscores Michael's role as heaven's enforcer of divine order. Parallels with earlier texts highlight what changed. In Daniel, Michael contends with national princes. In Jude, he disputes Satan cautiously. Here, he acts with unprecedented decisive force. The shift reflects Christianity's view of Christ's resurrection as a turning point in cosmic history. Gnostic texts rejected this militarized Michael, preferring a gentle revealer of secrets. Orthodox writers pushed back. Athanasius cited Revelation to prove the archangel's combative role in defending truth. The dragon's identity deepens the stakes. Revelation calls him the ancient serpent, linking him to Eden's tempter. Michael's victory thus reverses humanity's fall, not just angelic rebellion. This explains why artists from Albrecht Dürer to William Blake portrayed the scene with dramatic intensity. The 13th century Golden Legend embellished details, claiming Michael wounded the dragon so severely that Satan could no longer appear beautiful, only monstrous. Practical implications emerged quickly. When Roman persecution targeted Christians, Revelation's vision assured them heavenly forces were marshaled against earthly oppressors. Coptic Christians under Islamic rule later adapted this, depicting Michael protecting their churches from harm. The imagery even entered politics. Byzantine emperors used Michael's likeness on seals and coins, casting themselves as his earthly counterparts enforcing divine will. Yet the text leaves strategic gaps. Revelation never describes the battle's tactics or duration, only its outcome. This silence invites contemplation. A 4th century homily by Pseudo-Ephraim suggests the real conflict was moral. Michael won because he remained unmoved by pride, unlike Satan. Modern scholars note how this aligns with Jude's account of the Moses dispute. Both passages emphasize righteous restraint as true victory. The war's legacy persists in unexpected ways. Vatican exorcism rites invoke Michael's Revelation 12 victory as a template for spiritual warfare. Protestant reformers like Calvin downplayed the passage's literal elements while preserving its core message: evil's defeat is certain, even if incomplete. Today's military chaplains still reference this chapter when ministering to soldiers, drawing parallels between celestial and earthly battles. Michael emerges from this conflict transformed. No longer just Israel's protector or a soul's guide, he becomes the archetype of divine justice enforced. His next challenge would be adapting that role to an ever-expanding spiritual frontier, not among nations, but individual believers. The transition from Israel's guardian to universal protector didn't happen overnight. Early Christians faced a theological dilemma. How could Michael, so closely tied to Jewish identity in Scripture, become the defender of a faith that included Gentiles? The New Testament hints at this shift indirectly. While Michael appears only briefly in Jude and Revelation, his role expands through implication. The Epistle to the Hebrews describes angels as ministering spirits sent to serve those who will inherit salvation, a promise early Christians applied specifically to Michael based on his Old Testament record. Tomb etchings tell the rest of the story. In Rome's catacombs, 3rd-century inscriptions invoke Michael's protection over Christian graves alongside traditional Jewish symbols. This blending of traditions shows how belief in his guardianship crossed cultural lines. Theological justification came from patristic writers. Origen argued that since Christ's sacrifice extended to all humanity, the angels serving him must likewise expand standing for your people, noting that the church had now become God's chosen people spiritually. Augustine took this further, suggesting Michael's defense of Israel prefigured his protection of the church as the new Israel. This reinterpretation allowed Christians to claim the Archangel's services without discarding his Hebrew roots. Byzantine hymns from the same period reinforce this, calling Michael Shield of the Baptized, alongside his older title of Prince of Judah. Jewish and Christian expectations diverged sharply in practice. Rabbinic traditions maintained Michael's focus on national Israel, often depicting him holding heavenly scales to weigh the merits of Jewish souls. Christian art from the same era shows him shielding a multi-ethnic crowd beneath his wings. The difference wasn't just artistic, it reflected competing theologies of mediation. Jewish texts cautioned against over-reliance on angelic intercession, while Christian homilies encouraged believers to call on Michael's aid directly. A 4th-century Coptic prayer papyrus illustrates this shift, preserving a spell for protection that begins, "Michael, who stands at the right hand of God, guard my household." The archangel's evolving role faced resistance in some quarters. The Gelasian decree of the 6th century condemned apocryphal texts that exaggerated Michael's powers beyond biblical limits. Yet popular devotion continued growing. Pilgrimage sites like Monte Gargano in Italy attracted both Jewish and Christian visitors by claiming Michael apparitions, a rare instance of shared veneration. Gregory the Great mediated these tensions by formalizing Michael's ecclesial duties in liturgy. He designated the archangel as the Church's celestial advocate, responsible for presenting believers' prayers at the heavenly altar. This carefully balanced Ion respected biblical boundaries while accommodating grassroots piety. By the early Middle Ages, Michael's transformation was complete. Liturgical texts referred to him as Custos Ecclesiae, guardian of the church, echoing his Old Testament role but with universal scope. This paved the way for his later medieval portrayals as a knightly protector. The evolution wasn't merely symbolic. When plagues struck Constantinople, processions invoked Michael alongside medical saints. During Viking raids, French monks hid sacred relics under altars dedicated to him. The archangel, once charged with defending a single nation, now held the entire Christian world in his vigil. This expansion of Michael's role reveals something deeper about ancient religious psychology. Communities didn't discard their celestial defender when changing faiths. They adapted his portfolio. The same warrior who fought for Moses' body in Jude now battled demons harassing Christian ascetics. The guardian prince of Daniel became the patron of Gothic cathedrals. Yet through every reinterpretation, his core identity remained intact. Heaven's loyal commander, answering only to divine authority. What began as a national protectorate would eventually span continents. But first, medieval believers would encounter him in more intimate settings, proving his versatility as both general and healer. By the 4th century, Michael's reputation took an unexpected turn in Constantinople. The archangel, known for heavenly battles, became associated with healing springs and desperate prayers for physical deliverance. The Michaelian, a sanctuary built just outside the city walls, became the center of this devotion after Emperor Constantine's daughter claimed the archangel appeared to her near a medicinal spring. Records from the period describe how pilgrims submerged themselves in these waters while invoking Michael's nomenes, aim, leaving behind wax or metal effigies of healed body parts. This practice fused elements of Asclepius worship with Christian angelology, creating a new dimension to the seamlessly military and medical imagery blended in Byzantine art from this era. Mosaics showed Michael holding both a spear and a physician's tools. Sermons praised him as Christ's medic who healed souls while protecting bodies. The contradiction dissolves when considering how Byzantines viewed illness, not just as physical suffering but as spiritual warfare. Plagues were literal attacks from demonic forces, making Michael's combat skills medically relevant. A 6th century liturgical text captures this dual role perfectly. O commander of hosts, strike down our infirmities as you struck the dragon. Accounts from the Michaelian reveal specific healing protocols. Visitors spent nights in vigil before submerging at dawn, a ritual mirroring baptism. The waters weren't considered magical. Their efficacy depended on Michael's intercession. Palladius Lausiac history documents a noblewoman's healing after 3 visits, noting she saw a fiery figure standing in the spring. Other testimonies describe dreams where Michael diagnosed illnesses or prescribed treatments. These stories spread widely after the sanctuary survived a Persian siege in 626, which devotees attributed to Michael's protection. The compound became a fortress sanctuary where spiritual and physical survival intertwined. This healing aspect wasn't entirely new. Earlier Jewish apocrypha mentioned Michael restoring sight or granting fertility, but Constantinople institutionalized these practices. By the 7th century, hospitals dedicated to Michael appeared across the Eastern Empire, often built near military garrisons. Their architecture reflected the duality. Chapels featured murals of the Revelation War alongside basins for therapeutic baths. Medical texts prescribed prayers to Michael alongside herbal remedies, blurring the line between physic and faith. Western Christian. IT initially resisted this development. Pope Gregory I cautioned against overemphasizing angelic healing, fearing it might eclipse Christ's role. But the Eastern tradition proved resilient. When Justinian's plague ravaged Constantinople in 542, processions carrying Michael's icon reportedly halted outbreaks in certain districts. The archangel's versatility appealed increasingly as medieval societies faced both invasions and epidemics. His image evolved from a cosmic soldier to a more accessible figure, one who wielded a sword against demons, but also offered a healing hand to the sick. By the 10th century, even warrior cultures like the Normans adopted Michael as a patron of both knights and physicians. Monte Gargano in Italy and Mont Saint-Michel in France became major healing shrines, continuing the Byzantine model. The real shift wasn't in Michael's nature, but in human needs. Communities facing daily threats to body and soul required a defender who understood both battlefields. Constantinople's Michaelian set the pattern for seeing spiritual warfare and physical healing as 2 fronts in the same conflict. This paved the way for theologians to systematically define Michael's place in the celestial hierarchy, merging popular devotion with doctrinal precision. Church fathers would soon articulate what popular practice had demonstrated, that heaven's commander served a far more complex role than battlefield victor alone. When 4th century theologians tried to map heaven's chain of command, they faced a delicate problem. How could Michael hold supreme authority among angels without threatening God's singular majesty? Basil the Great tackled this in his treatise, De Angelis, arguing that Michael's leadership reflected divine delegation rather than shared divinity. He compared the archangel to a general executing an emperor's will, powerful, but never autonomous. His distinction mattered in an era when debates raged about Christ's nature. Elevating Michael too highly risked confusing the hierarchy between Eastern Orthodox theology for centuries, positioning Michael as heaven's prime minister rather than a co-ruler. Pseudo-Dionysius took systematization further in the celestial hierarchy. Writing under the pseudonym of Dionysius the Areopagite, he arranged angels into 9 choirs grouped in 3 spheres. Seraphim and cherubim occupied the highest tier, yet mysteriously, Michael often appeared leading lower ranks. Medieval scholars puzzled over this apparent demotion until realizing the text's deeper logic. Lower-ranked angels interacted directly with humans, making Michael's placement strategic. He bridged heaven and earth. This schema endured in Western Christianity thanks to Thomas Aquinas's endorsement. Though it never fully displaced Eastern traditions where Michael remained unclassified, his rank transcending categories. The classification debate hinged on whether archangel described Michael's nature or office. Greek fathers like Gregory of Nazianzus insisted it was functional. God could appoint any angel to the role. Latin theologians increasingly viewed it as intrinsic, arguing that Michael's unique essence suited him for command. The disagreement surfaced in liturgical practices. Byzantine rites invoked Michael generically as leader of heavenly hosts, leaving his exact status undefined. Western liturgies named him explicitly as Prince of the Seraphim, reflecting the Latin view of his permanent superiority. Both traditions agreed on one point, though. No, her angel consistently matched Michael's record of obedience and victory. Eastern Christianity maintained a fluid approach. Icons showed Michael wearing the lauros, a sash reserved for imperial officials, symbolizing delegated authority. Yet hymns cautioned against presuming to know his exact rank, singing, "We see your works, not your station." This balanced view vented the over-speculation that plagued Western scholastic debates. When Latin theologians like Bonaventure speculated about Michael commanding a legion of 12,000 angels based on Revelation's numbers, Byzantine theologians dismissed such calculations as missing the point. The resolution emerged through synthesis. Michael's supremacy wasn't about outranking other angels but exemplifying perfect mediation. He wielded power without coveting it, led without dominating, and judged without usurping, qualities that made him heaven's ideal intermediary. Church councils never dogmatized his position, allowing diverse interpretations while maintaining core unity. This flexibility proved vital when Islam's rise prompted defenses of angelology. Christian apologists cited Michael's biblical victories to counter Islamic claims about angels, while carefully distinguishing his service from Christ's divinity. By the early Middle Ages, Michael's theological portrait was complete, neither rival to God nor interchangeable angel, but creation's premier servant leader. This precise positioning enabled his next evolution, from theoretical hierarchy to practical roles touching every aspect of spiritual life. The 4 sacred offices awaiting him would stretch his responsibilities further than ancient believers imagined, merging battlefield courage with courtroom wisdom and pastoral care. What began as a theological puzzle would culminate in a multidimensional protector influencing everything from dying breaths to national destinies. By the Middle Ages, theologians had formalized Michael's responsibilities into 4 sacred offices that spanned the entirety of spiritual warfare and divine justice. The first and most prominent remained his role as commander of heaven's armies. Manuscripts like the 12th century Chivius by Hildegard of Bingen portrayed Michael wielding a flaming sword at the head of angelic legions, but with a crucial distinction. He didn't act independently. Unlike pagan war gods glorifying violence, Michael fought only at theological bedrock. When Saracens threatened Christian kingdoms, crusaders invoked Michael not as a bloodthirsty patron, but as a disciplined strategist who wages war without loving it, as Bernard of Clairvaux wrote. His second office emerged from ancient Jewish mysticism, the psychopomp guiding souls after death. Early Christian catacomb art showed Michael carrying deceased believers as infants in his arms, an image inspired by Jewish Merkabah traditions of angelic escorts. By the 8th century, liturgical prayers explicitly petitioned Michael to receive the souls of the departed. This duty expanded his portfolio beyond battlefields into intimate moments of human mortality. Byzantine funeral rites included a ritual cry, "Michael, stanchion of souls, be present now." The paradox fascinated medieval thinkers. How could the same angel who crushed demons with terrifying force also tenderly usher grandmothers into paradise? The third office addressed this tension directly. Artistic depictions of the Last Judgment gave Michael scales to weigh souls, blending mercy and justice. A 14th-century fresco in Padua captures this perfectly. The archangel balances virtues against sins while demons tug at the scales, their arguments rendered useless by his impartiality. Religious dramas performed in town squares acted out scenes where Michael adjudicated disputes between angels and devils over deceased individuals. These portrayals reinforced his role as heaven's supreme magistrate, implementing divine justice without compromising compassion. His fourth office synthesized the others, universal patronage over the church. Gothic cathedrals placed Michael's statues above entrances as vigilant sentinels. Pilgrimage routes like the Via Francigena featured wayside shrines where travelers prayed for his protection. This wasn't mere superstition, theology, and like Bonaventure explained that Michael's guardianship extended to the institutional church as the bark of Peter. When plagues or invasions struck monasteries, monks chanted the defense prayer, invoking all four offices simultaneously. Standard-bearer in battle, guide through death's shadow, weigher of justice, shield of Christ's flock. The brilliance of this medieval system lay in its comprehensive spiritual coverage. Michael wasn't relegated to one niche. He operated at all levels from cosmic to personal. A peasant fearing bandits, a dying monk, a king planning military campaigns, and a theologian debating salvation could all find Michael relevant to their needs. Manuscript illuminations often depicted him multitasking, one hand holding scales, the other wielding a sword, wings spread protectively over a church. This visual shorthand communicated his seamless integration of duties. These four offices didn't compete, but synergized. His military experience informed fair judgment at the scales. His familiarity with death's door enhanced his ability to protect the living. And all these roles served his ultimate task, keeping the church militant and triumphant connected. With this theological framework established, Christians sought ways to ritually engage Michael's manifold services. The solution emerged through annual rhythms that made heavenly interventions tangible within ordinary time. Liturgical calendars would soon allocate specific dates for encountering each dimension of Michael's sacred work. The Christian calendar reveals a fascinating pattern. Michael gets honored everywhere, but rarely on the same date. Western Christianity celebrates Michaelmas on September 29th, a feast dating back to the 5th century. This timing wasn't arbitrary. It fell near the autumn equinox, when medieval communities prepared for winter's spiritual darkness. Farmers paid tithes on this day, calling it the Goose Mass, as they offered livestock for Michaelmas daisies, believed to ward off evil when planted near homes. The date also marked the start of legal terms in England, with judges invoking Michael's justice before court sessions. This blending of agricultural, judicial, and spiritual traditions shows how Michael's influence permeated daily life. Eastern Orthodox churches took a different approach. Instead of a single feast, they honored Michael collectively with all angelic orders during the synaxis of the bodiless powers on November 8th. Byzantine hymns from this celebration reveal a theological nuance. While Michael led the heavenly hosts, the focus remained on angelic obedience rather than individual glory. Some Eastern rites added a second commemoration on September 6th, tying Michael's intercession to the miracle at Colossae where he diverted a flood. This regional variation demonstrates how local miracles could reshape liturgical calendars without disrupting unity. Coptic Christians in Egypt developed the most frequent devotions. Their calendar reserved the 12th day of every month for Michael, with special observances during the month of Hathor, November. Ancient Coptic manuscripts preserve night-long vigils where believers recited the 151st Psalm alongside prayers to the Archangel. This monthly rhythm ensured continuous protection across the year's cycles. Ethiopian Orthodox Christians went further, dedicating 12 annual feasts to Michael. One for each hour Christ hung on the cross, reinforcing his role as guardian of redemption's timeline. The discrepancies between traditions tell a larger story. When Rome standardized Michaelmas in the 9th century, Celtic Christians initially resisted, preferring their traditional springtime observance. This tension reveals how regional spirituality shaped Michael's veneration. Cold, northern climates associated him with survive, all against winter's deathly chill, while Mediterranean churches emphasized his defense against summer's drought-induced famines. Yet all traditions shared core elements: light processions, honey-based foods symbolizing celestial sweetness, and readings from Revelation's war narrative. Liturgical calendars became theological statements. Western dates aligned Michaelmas with harvest security, reflecting tangible earthly needs. Eastern dates placed angelic commemorations after Mary's feasts, showing created beings in proper hierarchy. Coptic monthly observances wove Michael into time's fabric itself. These differences didn't fracture devotion, but demonstrated Michael's adaptability across cultures. Facultress's NCT challenges. A 10th-century Frankish monk visiting Constantinople might have been startled to see Michael's feast celebrated differently, but he would instantly recognize the Archangel's enduring role as heaven's defender. The proliferation of feast days solved a practical problem: how to engage communities with celestial realities. By anchoring Michael's protection to agricultural cycles, legal years, and monthly rhythms, churches made divine guardianship tangible. Farmers planting Michaelmas rye or judges opening court terms weren't performing empty rituals. They were participating in a cosmic story where earthly and heavenly timelines intersected. This calendar theology prepared believers for Michael's next manifestation, not in liturgy alone, but in art that would make his presence visible to eyes beyond the written word. Medieval artists faced a unique challenge: how to depict an archangel who was both warrior and judge, executioner and guardian. The solution emerged in dual iconography that blended martial and judicial symbols seamlessly. Early Byzantine mosaics showed Michael wearing a general's cloak while holding scales, his sword resting against his shoulder. This wasn't artistic inconsistency, but deliberate theology. The dragon-slaying motif, popular in Western art after the 10th century, carried layered meaning. The defeated serpent often bore the face of local rulers who oppressed the church. The message was clear: just as Michael overcame cosmic evil, he would thwart earthly tyrants. The scales of psychostasia, weighing souls, appeared first in Egyptian funerary art, but gained Christian significance in Byzantine psalters. A 9th century manuscript depicts Michael measuring a soul's virtues against sins while demons attempt to tip the balance. What fascinates historians is how armor and wings functioned symbolically. Gilded Byzantine icons gave Michael steel greaves and breastplates resembling imperial gods, signaling heavenly authority. His wings, however, remained unfurled, a reminder of his power derived from divine connection, not earthly gear. Western Gothic artists reversed this, presenting massive feathered wings overshadowing simpler armor to emphasize celestial over martial might. Regional distinctions reveal cultural priorities. Italian Renaissance painters like Guido Reni softened Michael's features, making him an idealized youth. German woodcuts amplified his ferocity, showing him trampling a dragon with exaggerated violence. Eastern Orthodox icons maintained a middle path. Their Michael was neither delicate nor brutal, but austere, his eyes fixed beyond the frame toward God. The 12th century mosaic at Torcello Cathedral captures this perfectly. One hand grips a spear, the other cradles a soul, his expression neither triumphant nor tender, but resolute. Political undertones surfaced in commissioned works. French kings favored scenes of Michael defeating a multi-headed dragon, each head labeled with threats to the realm: heresy, rebellion, plague. Papal commissions in Rome emphasized the judgment aspect, with scales towering over battle scenes. This wasn't arbitrary. During the investiture controversy, Pope Gregory VII used Michael imagery to assert church authority over emperors, portraying the archangel as heaven's chancellor enforcing divine law. The clothing details carried theological weight. Eastern Michael wore the Lauros sash, a Byzantine imperial symbol denoting delegated authority. Western artists gave him knightly attire, aligning with chivalric codes. Both traditions agreed on one element. The nimbus surrounding his head always bore a cruciform pattern, distinguishing him from saints and affirming his role in Christ's victory. By the 14th century, Michael's iconography had crystallized into a visual language anyone could read. Farmers, viewing a parish fresco, understood the dragon's defeat promised protection for crops. Dying Christians clutching pilgrimage badges saw the scales as hope for merciful judgment. Knights emblazoning his image on shields invoked both his military prowess and moral accountability. Art didn't just depict Michael's roles, it activated them, turning stone and pigment into spiritual conduits. The durability of these symbols lies in their dual service. They inspired devotion while teaching theology. A peasant might not grasp Pseudo-Dionysius's celestial hierarchies, but they recognized Michael's sword and scales as heaven's commitment to justice and defense. This visual shorthand proved so effective that warriors across Europe would soon claim personal allegiance to the archangel, forging a bond between celestial protector and earthly combatants that endures to this day. When French King Louis XI founded the Order of St. Michael in 1469, he chose its celestial namesake carefully. The archangel represented more than military might. He symbolized the sacred duty of Christian rulers. Members wore gold medallions showing Michael defeating the dragon, a visual reminder that earthly power must serve heavenly justice. This wasn't mere pager. Natry. The Order's statutes required knights to defend the church and uphold moral law, framing chivalry. Crusaders had engraved Michael's name on their swords before departing for Jerusalem. A 12th century chronicle describes Templars invoking him during battles, believing his presence turned the tide against Saracen forces even when outnumbered. Kings leveraged Michael's imagery for political legitimacy. Charlemagne commissioned artworks showing the archangel crowning him, implying divine approval for his rule. Byzantine emperors went further, adopting Michael as their personal patron and naming fortresses after him. The message was clear. Just as Michael served God faithfully, so too must subjects obey their anointed rulers. This connection between divine and earthly authority reached its peak with Frederick Barbarossa, who staged elaborate Michaelmas ceremonies where knights swore oaths mimicking the archangel's loyalty. The tension between heavenly and earthly warfare surfaced in knightly training. Manuals like the 14th century Libro del Ordre de Cavalleria contrasted Michael's disciplined campaigns with human armies' undisciplined violence. Young nobles learned that true knighthood meant channeling the archangel's virtues, fighting only just wars, showing mercy to the defeated, and never glorifying bloodshed. This ideal proved difficult in practice. During the Albigensian Crusade, chroniclers reported knights praying to Michael before massacring heretics, blurring the line between righteous zeal and brutality. Artifacts reveal how deeply Michael permeated martial culture. A surviving 13th century sword from Germany bears an inscription invoking his protection alongside decorative dragons, symbolizing defeated evil. Tournament armor often featured his winged figure on breastplates, suggesting an invisible shield against opponents' blows. The dichotomy wasn't lost on medieval thinkers. Bernard of Clairvaux cautioned that wearing Michael's size, mage meant nothing if knights failed to emulate his obedience to divine will. Relics reinforced the connection. Venice claimed possession of Michael's sword, displayed in San Marco's treasury. French knights made pilgrimages to Mont Saint-Michel, where tidal patterns were interpreted as miraculous defenses mimicking the archangel's celestial battles. These physical connections made heavenly protection tangible for warriors facing death daily. The psychological impact was measurable. Joan of Arc cited visions of Michael guiding her military decisions, while Spanish conquistadors carried his banners into New World battles. The sacralization of knighthood reached its zenith in rituals like the Adoubement ceremony. Initiates kept vigil before altars dedicated to Michael, their swords laid beside biblical passages describing his victories. Unlike pagan warrior initiations that focused on strength alone, these rites emphasized moral readiness. A 15th-century Florentine manuscript depicts the Archangel appearing in a blaze of light to test would-be knights, demanding they choose between earthly glory and eternal service. This fusion of military and spiritual ideals created a paradox. Michael represented both the perfect warrior and one who lamented violence. Crusader diaries mention strange battlefield phenomena, claimed visions of Michael turning away during particularly brutal engagements, as if withholding approval. Theological debates arose about whether the Archangel sanctioned holy war or merely protected individual souls caught in conflict. The answer emerged in evolving iconography. Later medieval artworks showed Michael's sword pointing downward unless actively combating evil, signaling restraint as the highest martial virtue. By the Renaissance, Michael's status as patron of warriors was institutionalized across Europe, but his influence wasn't confined to, the past. The same symbols that adorned Crusader shields would eventually appear on modern contemporary barracks. The archetype of the disciplined protector endures, proof that certain ideals transcend their historical context. The next chapter of Michael's story would see his imagery adapted for challenges its medieval devotees could never have imagined. Modern warfare looks nothing like the battles Michael fought in Scripture. Drones have replaced swords, satellites stand in for flaming chariots, yet military bases worldwide still display the Archangel's image. The Russian Air Force uses Michael's winged figure in its emblem, while Italy's Carabinieri police wear his likeness on their uniform patches. Portuguese paratroopers recite prayers to him before jumps, a tradition dating to World War II when commandos credited his intercession for surviving impossible missions. Police departments from Mexico City to Munich adopt scales and sword badges modeled after medieval Michael icons, merging ancient symbolism with modern law enforcement. Why does a celestial being from 2,000-year-old texts remain relevant to organizations armed with night vision and cyber defenses? The answer lies in what hasn't changed about combat. Soldiers still face fear, moral ambiguity, and the burden of wielding lethal force. French foreign legionnaires report clinging to Michael medals during firefights, not expecting magical protection, but drawing courage from his example of righteous resolve. Ukrainian tank crews in the Donbass region scratched Michael's name onto artillery shells, not as superstition, but as a reminder that even mechanized war requires ethical boundaries. Bodycam footage from American SWAT teams shows some officers whispering the St. Michael prayer before breaching doors, a ritual that psychologist Dr. David Rio studied in his 2018 study of tactical decision-making under stress. Paratrooper devotion underscores this relationship best. Since World War II, airborne units from Brazil to Poland have embraced Michael as patron, not just because he's depicted with wings, but because jumpers share his literal and metaphorical fall from heights. Brazilian military archives preserve letters from soldiers during the 1960s Congo crisis, describing visions of a winged figure stabilizing their parachutes amidst anti-aircraft fire. The tradition persists. When U.S. Army airborne recruits earn their wings at Fort Benning, veterans pin St. Michael medals inside their maroon berets. Police adoption reveals another dimension. Unlike soldiers, officers operate in civilian spaces where rules of engagement blur. The NYPD's 72nd Precinct in Brooklyn displays a stained glass window of Michael subduing a demon, not celebrating violence but visualizing the struggle to balance authority with restraint. Body armor manufacturers like Safariland etched tiny Michael icons into helmet liners, a detail discovered unexpectedly when forensic teams examined gear after the 2015 Paris attacks. Technological warfare hasn't diminished these connections, it's reshaped them. Drone pilots at Nevada's Creech Air Force Base report mounting St. Michael statues beside their consoles, a practice tolerated despite official secular policies. Cyber warfare units in Israel and South Korea use Michael's sword symbolism in hacking operation code names, framing digital defense as spiritual warfare's latest frontier. The Archangel's adaptability stems from representing principles, not primitive combat. Where medieval knights saw a dragon slayer, modern soldiers see an ethical compass, someone who fought evil without becoming it. The persistence of Michael's devotion in the armed forces reveals an uncomfortable truth about modern combat. Advanced technology hasn't eliminated the ancient human need for moral anchors. Whether printed on a police badge or whispered in a trench, his image continues serving its original purpose, reminding warriors that true strength lies in serving justice, not because soldiers believe an angel will deflect bullets, but because after 2,000 years, Michael remains the most concise symbol of what it means to wield power responsibly. Weapons evolve, but the warrior's soul still needs guarding. Prayer cards distributed to recruits distilled this into practical terms. The U.S. military archdiocese's version lists Michael's 4 medieval offices: protector, guide, judge, and healer, followed by blank lines for soldiers to write their own definitions of service. This simple exercise bridges ancient theology with modern duty, preparing those who read it for battles far stranger than their ancestors could comprehend. The St. Michael prayer distilled 2 millennia of devotion into 7 Latin lines. Composed in 1884 by Pope Leo XIII after a disturbing vision of demonic attacks on the church, its spread was both rapid and organic. Unlike liturgical prayers requiring official approval, this invocation circulated through grassroots networks. Missionaries carried it to frontier towns, soldiers passed handwritten copies in trenches, mothers tucked it into children's schoolbooks. The prayer's power lies in its theological precision. Each phrase corresponds to one of Michael's sacred offices: defend us in battle, addresses his military leadership; be our protection, invokes his guardian role; may God rebuke him, echoes his judicial restraint; and do thou, O Prince of the heavenly host, acknowledges his ecclesial authority. Exorcism rites standardized the prayer's use after Vatican II. Catholic deliverance manuals prescribe its recitation during preliminary spiritual assessments, not as a weapon itself, but as a diagnostic tool. The logic is subtle. If an evil spirit reacts violently to Michael's name, it confirms supernatural oppression rather than mental illness. Case notes from Father Gabriele Amor. His files describe possessed individuals screaming when the prayer reached the words infernal spirits, while unaffected persons remained calm. This distinction made it invaluable for clergy to balance skepticism with supernatural possibility. The prayer's effectiveness stems from its layered structure. It begins with a collective petition, defend us, shifts to individual surrender, thrust into hell, and concludes with a cosmic perspective, all wicked spirits. This mirrors medieval notions of spiritual warfare operating simultaneously on personal and universal levels. Modern neuroscience offers an unexpected parallel. The prayer's rhythmic cadence and concrete imagery activate both the analytical prefrontal cortex and the intuitive limbic system simultaneously. Believers aren't just reciting words, but rehearsing a mental map of divine protection. Private devotion transformed the prayer's application. Italian grandmothers taught grandchildren to whisper it when passing cemeteries. Texas oil rig workers laminated cards to clip inside hard hats. Japanese converts after Buddha II adapted it into calligraphic wall scrolls. These variations reveal cultural reinterpretation while preserving the theological core. The prayer proved remarkably portable. During the Cold War-era persecutions, Lithuanian Catholics scratched shortened versions onto prison walls using pins and charcoal. Liturgical use followed a different path. While the Leonine prayers after Mass included it until 1964, post-Vatican II reforms made its use optional. This created a paradox. The prayer flourished privately while fading from official rites. Traditionalist communities maintained obligatory recitation, but most parishes reserved it for emergencies like natural disasters or parish conflicts. The discrepancy highlights how popular devotion often outpaces institutional directives when see lease. Style protection feels urgent. Military chaplains developed hybrid uses. After 9/11, U.S. Army field manuals included the prayer in alongside trauma first aid, not as superstition, but as psychological anchoring. Veterans' memoirs from Iraq and Afghanistan describe repeating the Latin phrases during ambushes, not expecting miraculous rescue, but regaining tactical focus. The prayer proved adaptable precisely because it wasn't magic. It was a mental discipline disguised as a petition. The prayer's endurance stems from unmet human needs that transcend eras. Urban violence replaces medieval bandits, cyber threats substitute for dragons, but the craving for moral clarity remains. Parents still teach it to children facing schoolyard bullies. Nurses murmur it outside ICU rooms. Its genius lies in balancing specificity, naming real evil, with restraint, leaving judgment to God. Unlike charms promising guaranteed results, it acknowledges spiritual warfare's unpredictability while asserting ultimate divine sovereignty. This compact invocation carries the weight of Michael's entire legacy, from Babylonian battles to Byzantine hymns to battlefield foxholes. It offers neither easy answers nor sentimental comfort, but aligns the speaker with an ancient defensive posture. Just as Michael stood between Eden's flaming sword and exiled humanity, his prayer stands between modern souls and the void. The words haven't changed because the dangers haven't either, only their disguises. Michael's influence extends far beyond Christianity into other faith traditions, though his role shifts subtly in each. In Islam, he appears as Mikael, one of 4 archangels alongside Jibril, Gabriel, Israfil, and Azrael. The Quran mentions him explicitly only once in Surah 298, warning against making enemies of God's angels. Yet Hadith literature expands his duties dramatically. He oversees natural phenomena like rain and vegetation, embodying divine providence rather than warfare. Sunni traditions describe him as having wings of emerald green, with each feather containing millions of faces that weep for human sins. This compassionate portrayal contrasts sharply with Christianity's armored defender, though both agree on his obedience to God's will. Jehovah's Witnesses present a radical reinterpretation. They identify Michael as Jesus Christ in his pre-human and resurrected existence. This doctrine stems from their reading of 1 Thessalonians 4:16, where the voice of the archangel accompanies Christ's return. Watchtower publications argue the title Archangel, meaning chief angel, can only apply to Jesus, making Michael another name for God's Son. They reject the traditional view of Michael as a created angel, seeing this as compromising Christ's divinity. This theological gambit solves a problem: how to explain Jesus' absence between his ascension and return, by having him serve covertly as heaven's commander. Latter-day Saint theology offers another distinctive take. Mormon scripture presents Michael as Adam before his earthly life, the first human now serving as a celestial general. The Book of Jude's cryptic reference to Michael disputing over Moses' body takes new meaning here. It becomes a pre-mortal confrontation. LDS temples depict this in endowment ceremonies, showing Michael participating in creation and the Garden of Eden narrative. This connection between archangel and progenitor explains why early Mormon pioneers named settlements like St. Michael, Arizona. They saw themselves as literal descendants of this celestial being. Seventh-day Adventists split the difference between orthodox and unconventional views. Ellen G. White's writings describe Michael as Christ's heavenly title during the Great Controversy against Satan. Unlike Jehovah's Witnesses, they don't equate him with Jesus fully, but see the name as a role assumed during cosmic conflict. This explains why Revelation 12 shows Michael fighting rather than Christ directly. Its theological theater emphasizing different aspects cast Michael's final victory as coinciding with Christ's second coming, blending the identities without fully merging them. Despite these variations, common threads emerge. Every tradition preserves Michael's mediating role, whether as provider, Islam, divine avatar, Jehovah's Witnesses, ancestral protector, LDS, or cosmic champion, Adventism. The shared archetype explains his cross-cultural appeal, a being powerful enough to confront evil yet subordinate enough to model perfect obedience. Islam avoids depicting him militantly, but keeps his defensive function through natural stewardship. Restorationist faiths amplify his Christ connections while retaining his warrior essence. This adaptability suggests something fundamental about humanity's spiritual imagination. Cultures recast Michael to solve their unique theological problems. Islamic emphasis on God's transcendence requires a less militant mediator. Mormonism's premortal existence doctrine needs an archangelic Adam, but the core remains. When believers face existential threats, whether physical or metaphysical, they still reach for this ancient defender under different names. The persistence of Michael-like figures across religions points to a deeper human need for a champion who bridges heaven's might and earthly vulnerability. Pilgrimage sites worldwide capitalize on this universal appeal, their physical landscapes offering tangible connection points to the Archangel's enduring legacy. From the tidal convent of Mont Saint-Michel to the healing springs of Chonai, these locations preserve rituals that transcend doctrinal differences, proving that devotion often outpaces theology. The stones of these sacred places whisper the same truth in every tongue. Protection comes to those who call its name. Certain places on earth seem stamped with Michael's presence. Monte Sant'Angelo in southern Italy claims the earliest recorded apparition, a cave where the Archangel appeared in 490 AD. Witnesses described him leaving behind a footprint in stone and commanding the grotto's consecration. What's striking isn't just the vision, but how the site's geography reinforced it. Pilgrims descending 86 steps into the mountain pass niches holding ex votos, silver limbs and crutches left by the healed. The cavern's natural acoustics amplify whispers, making communal prayers reverberate like an unseen host. For 15 centuries, this underground sanctuary has drawn everyone from medieval crusaders to modern soldiers, all seeking tangible proof of celestial protection. Mont Saint-Michel's tidal island off France's coast tells a different story. Benedictine monks built their abbey here after a 708 AD vision where Michael instructed its construction. The location wasn't random. The bay's extreme tides, which can rise 46 feet, created natural defenses mimicking heavenly warfare. At high tide, the sea surrounds the mount like besieging armies. At low tide, pilgrims cross exposed sands as if walking through divided waters. This interplay between geology and devotion reaches its peak during the Marée du siècle tidal surges, when the island becomes completely isolated. Medieval visitors saw these moments as Michael drawing his fortress up into the spiritual realm temporarily. The most dramatic terrain alteration appears in Chonai, Turkey. A 4th century legend claims Michael diverted an entire river to save his shrine from sabotage. Pagans had dammed the Lycos River to flood the chapel, but the Archangel split the torrent with his spear, carving a new channel that spared the sanctuary. Modern archaeologists found something intriguing. The church ruins sit precisely where 2 river forks meet, suggesting actual hydrologic engineering may have inspired the miracle story. Whether natural or supernatural, the site's preservation against impossible odds golden lamps here annually, recognizing its strategic position near the Persian frontier as both militarily and spiritually significant. These locations share unexpected patterns. Nearly all appear along ancient fault lines or geothermal hotspots. Monte Sant'Angelo sits above sulfuric springs, while Mont Saint-Michel's tides result from seismic activity. Many cluster near borders or invasion routes where protection would be most urgently sought. The shrines also favor elevations, mountaintops, sea cliffs, or deep caves, physically reinforcing Michael's role as bridge between heaven and earth. Artifacts reveal how pilgrims personalized encounters. Excavated lead pilgrim badges from the 1300s show devotees scraping flakes off shrine walls to ingest like medicine, believing Michael's power permeated the very stones. Yet the site's true power lies in their unfinished nature. At Monte Sant'Angelo, the altar remains bare rock because Michael allegedly forbade embellishment, a perpetual reminder of divine encounter. Mont Saint-Michel's ever-shifting sands erase all but the most determined footsteps, mirroring spiritual perseverance. Chonai's relocated river still follows its altered course centuries later, visible proof that intervention leaves lasting marks. These places work because they don't just commemorate miracles. They demand participation. Visitors don't merely see evidence of Michael, they walk where he walked, touch what he touched, and by doing so join an unbroken chain of seekers stretching back millennia. The survival of these sites through wars and regime changes proves their resilience. Lombard kings, Norman conquerors, and Napoleon's troops All visited Monte Sant'Angelo, not to destroy it, but to appropriate its power. Mont Saint-Michel withstood multiple sieges because attackers feared provoking the Archangel. Chonai's ruins still draw pilgrims despite the region's religious shifts. This endurance suggests something fundamental. Humanity instinctively preserves places where the veil between worlds feels thin. Michael's shrines endure because they answer a perennial need, to stand where heaven's defense became tangible just once, and know it could happen again. Their stones hold more than history. They keep alive the possibility that celestial guardians still patrol the borders between seen and unseen. Michael's influence stretches far beyond scripture into the creative arts, where he's been reimagined for centuries. John Milton's Paradise Lost gave him a starring role in the cosmic war against Satan, but with a twist. This Michael isn't just a warrior. Milton portrays him as a weary commander who pities the fallen angels even as he defeats them. The Archangel's duel with Satan unfolds slowly, almost reluctantly, mirroring the poem's theme of lost glory. What makes this version compelling isn't the battle itself, but Michael's conflicted nobility. He wins without triumph, enforcing divine justice while mourning its necessity. Renaissance artists took a different approach. Guido Reni's 1636 painting, Saint Michael triumphing over the devil, shows a youthful, almost effeminate angel hovering above a snarling demon. The contrast is deliberate, beauty subduing brutality without effort. But look closer. Michael's expression lacks anger. His eyes are focused elsewhere, as if the fight is beneath him. This psychological depth reshaped how audiences saw the Archangel. No longer just a religious symbol, he became a study in restraint, his humanity overshadowing his divinity. Literature expanded his role further. Goethe's Faust includes a scene where Michael battles Mephistopheles, but here the conflict is ideological. The Archangel represents not just God's will, but the enduring power of moral order. Modern fantasy writers continued this tradition. Neil Gaiman's Sandman comics feature a Michael who is both fearsome and tragic, a soldier bound by duty in a changing world. What does righteousness look like when the rules of war keep shifting? Music gave Michael a voice in unexpected ways. Medieval hymns portrayed him as heaven's herald, but 20th century composers explored darker tones. Benjamin Britten's War Requiem weaves the sanctus with wartime poetry, framing Michael as a silent witness to human violence. The absence of his traditional militarism is telling. Here he serves as a reminder of what war costs, even when fought for just causes. Secular adaptations often strip away the theology, but keep the archetype. The Supernatural TV series reimagines Michael as an ambiguous figure who believes the ends justify the means. Video games like Darksiders cast him as a flawed commander struggling with loyalty. These versions resonate because they tap into a timeless tension, how to wield power without corruption. Yet devotional art maintains its own power. Eastern Orthodox icons show Michael holding scales that weigh souls against feathers, a visual metaphor for justice tempered by mercy. Mexican folk art depicts him with indigenous features, blending Aztec warrior imagery with Christian symbolism. The diversity proves his adaptability. He isn't locked in one era or style, but evolves with those who revere him. The common thread across these portrayals is Michael's role as a boundary figure. He exists where order meets chaos, duty meets compassion, and heaven meets earth. That's why he fascinates artists. He embodies conflicts we all face. Whether in a 17th century poem or a modern graphic novel, he remains less a character than a mirror. Each generation sees in him what it needs: a perfect soldier, a reluctant hero, or a warning about the price of power. His cultural legacy says more about us than him. We keep retelling his story because we're still grappling with the same questions he represents. When is force justified? How much should obedience cost? Can justice ever be merciful? The answers change, but the Archangel endures, a silent witness to our endless search for balance. His final lesson isn't about victory, but the weight of the sword and the hands that choose to wield it. For thousands of years, across civilizations and faiths, Michael has stood guard at the boundary between order and chaos. His story isn't just about heavenly battles, it's about humanity's need for protection beyond what mortal strength can offer. Whether facing ancient empires or personal struggles, people keep turning to this archangel because he represents something timeless, the hope that evil won't have the final word. So what does Michael's legacy mean for you? When have you sensed that presence shielding you from life's unseen dangers? Share your experiences below, because every generation needs reminding that defenders still watch from beyond. Stay vigilant, stay hopeful,